Hi guys, welcome to Polyphonic Tarot. I'm Prince of Cups 518 and here today to do a new tutorial video on the Seven of Swords is what we're going to be looking at today. So here we are with the Seven of Swords in the Weight deck, of course, is depicted by the guy sneaking around with the swords and kind of stealing them from a tent of some kind. Usually, it's usually like, you know, either a jester figure or something, or someone running off with a bunch of swords. So it's always had this energy of kind of shady dealings and secrecy and espionage and that kind of thing. Spying. It's always had those kind of connotations, and also connotation of just of people sneaking around behind your back to you know. But the card in the Thoth deck is a little bit different, which, you know, it still works with the weight interpretation of that card being a symbol of thievery and stuff like that, but it is modified quite a bit, and as most of the minors in Crowley's deck are, as we've gathered at this point. At this point, we are almost done with the minor arcana, and so you know, we've seen a couple of cards now in which his interpretation is a little bit different and a little bit more. I almost want to say that this one is a little bit more generally applicable, as opposed to the thievery and sneaking around. I mean, you can when you get this card, it can sometimes represent that. It really depends on the context. But in general, it is called the Lord of Futility, and that sums it up very nicely. So this is what he says about it. Netzach in the suit of swords does not represent such catastrophe as in other suits. Netzach, the Sephir of Venus, means victory. It is therefore a modifying influence, and this is accentuated by the celestial rule of the moon in Aquarius. Now this is funny that he talks about this as if this energy is a good thing. You know, it isn't so bad, because if you go back to the section on the sevens in general, he says the Seven of Swords is called Futility. This is yet a weaker card than the Seven of Wands. It has a passive sign instead of an active one, a passive planet instead of an active one. And then he says the little energy that it possesses is no more than dream work. It is quite incapable of the sustained labor which alone, bar miracles, can bring any endeavor to fruition. So, you know, and he compares it a lot to the Seven of Wands and says that that's a good idea for the student to do, to compare the Seven of Swords to the Seven of Wands, because they are very similar. The Seven of Wands is a lot is basically desperation and power that is exhausted and really has no real chance of success, but it activates anyway, either mostly out of this kind of more or less noble reason. And for that reason, it's a little bit more pure and has slightly higher aspirations. This is very weak, and with the moon here as a passive planet and a passive sign of Aquarius, we get much less the idea of violence and aggression that the Seven of Wands has, and this is, you know, still this feeling of inability, or really not a whole lot of energy left to really accomplish what one's looking to accomplish, but it's a lot less desperate about it, and it's much more willing to kind of lay down and take it. So it's the Seven of Swords. Let's see what I want to say about that. Let's go on, because there's other stuff here. The intellectual wreckage of the card is thus not so vehement as in the Five. There is vacillation or wish to compromise a certain toleration, but in certain circumstances the results may be more disastrous than ever. This naturally depends upon the success of the policy. Okay, so the interesting thing about this too is that on the Pillar of Mercy on the Tree of Life with the Suit of Swords, we've been talking a lot about how this suit deals with us versus them, and how the Four of Swords above it is all about compromise and government and structure and diplomacy and that sort of thing, and trying to attempts to keep the peace. And we've talked about how that can sometimes be a good thing and sometimes can be a bad thing. This is where it really turns into a bad thing. This is where we have the idea of the individual, which is represented by the big, oh, my father's cell phone, the big sword in the middle, and all these other swords, sorry, glare and stuff, all these other swords on the side here represent other forces that are contradicting that central force. And if you look, all of the swords pointing down have different planetary symbols, and the central one is associated with the sun, and at the tip is the moon. So this is kind of interesting to think about. Really, this is saying that the sun is the representation of the individual and the individual ego, particularly. And this is representative of basically whatever desires, whatever fantasies, whatever wishes the individual has in this card. They are frustrated and put down by other forces, and not necessarily in a violent way, in kind of a bit of a surreptitious sort of pacifist way. It's a card of compromising the self when the self doesn't really need to be compromised. This is really just for the benefit of everyone else, and not necessarily for the benefit of the individual. In certain circumstances, perhaps you could see it that way. But when I get this card in readings and I interpret this card, I tend to see it as a bad thing. That whatever it is the individual is trying to accomplish for themselves, other people are just either telling them that it's pointless, hence the name of the card, or they are trying to advise them against it, or all this stuff, and they don't really need to be advising them against it. There's this idea of illusion in this card because of the moon, the influence of the moon in Aquarius, and Netzach being kind of the sense of weakness. Just this whole card is really not a great card, and there's a lot of vacillation. He goes on to say this card, like the Four, suggests the policy of appeasement, which is what we've been talking about. And then, yes, the swords are sort of positioned so that they represent a contest between the many feeble and the one strong. He strives in vain. And so that also kind of informs my reading of this card, because of that whole statement between the many feeble and the one strong. The individual in this card is not necessarily wrong for wanting whatever it is that they want. Everyone else is just too weak to put up with it, and so instead of allowing the person to access their individual power, they attempt to put that person down, basically to make themselves feel better or whatever, anything like that. And that's really all the card is about. So I hope that helps. And soon enough, we will be moving on to the Eight of Swords, and we will soon be done with this suit, and then we'll move on to Pentacles. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you liked it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and be sure to check out my website, polyphonictarot.com. Again, I'm Prince of Cups 518. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.